The ship Hope's beacon glided silently through the vast emptiness of space. It wasn't a warship or a battleship, but a hospital ship designed to provide aid to all species in need. It had been cruising the outer rim of a war-torn region, offering medical care to planets torn apart by conflict. Inside its walls, the mood was calm. The hum of the medical equipment and the soft chatter of the staff created an atmosphere of peace, one that felt far removed from the chaos of the universe outside. Dr. Maria Collins, the ship's lead medical officer, sat in her small office reviewing a patient file when the first warning signal blared through the intercom. It was a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. The sudden sharpness of it made her jump. She pushed her chair back, her heart rate rising. What was happening? It's just a drill, she thought, trying to calm herself. But the lights flickered, and the intercom crackled again, this time with an urgent voice. "This is the captain. All hands, prepare for an emergency. We are under attack. I repeat, we are under attack." Maria's blood ran cold. The Hope's beacon was not a ship built for combat. It was a floating sanctuary, a place for healing, not war. Who would attack a hospital ship? The thought seemed absurd, but the captain's voice left no room for doubt. It was happening. She rushed out of her office, making her way through the narrow corridors to the central hub. The crew was moving swiftly, running toward their stations. The atmosphere had shifted from calm to frantic in mere moments. The ship wasn't equipped with weapons. Its purpose was peace. But peace was a fragile thing in the middle of space, especially in this region. As Maria reached the main control room, she found Captain Flynn standing in front of a large monitor. The image on the screen was nothing short of terrifying. A fleet of alien ships loomed in front of the Hope's beacon, their dark forms casting ominous shadows against the stars. They were sleek and menacing, built for destruction, not diplomacy. Maria could feel her breath quicken. "What's happening?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're being targeted," Flynn answered, his expression grim. "They locked onto us. Weapons are armed." Maria felt her pulse hammer in her chest. Who were these attackers? Why would anyone target a medical ship? The Hope's beacon had no military value. Its only purpose was to help, to save lives. Yet, here they were, surrounded by hostile forces, and she had no idea why. The ship shuddered as the first blast struck the outer hull. The monitor flickered, showing the damage. Nothing fatal, but the impact was enough to make Maria's heart skip a beat. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again, more urgent this time. "Shields are holding for now, but they're going to break soon. All non-essential crew, get to the escape pods. Medical staff, we need to be ready for casualties. Everyone else, brace for impact." The intercom cut off abruptly. Maria's stomach tightened. There was no way they could outrun these ships. Escape pods. They were designed for short-term evacuation, not for fleeing a full-scale attack. Their best chance was to survive long enough for help to arrive. But she couldn't even be sure if they had that much time. Maria turned to the team of medical officers gathered in the room. "Prepare the medical bays," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to be ready for injuries, casualties, anything that comes our way." The team nodded and scattered, each of them rushing to their stations. Maria moved toward the observation window, staring at the alien ships. She could feel the sweat gathering on her palms as she gripped the cool metal. The attackers had launched a full-scale assault. Why? She didn't understand. They had nothing to gain from destroying the hospital ship, unless it's not about the ship at all, she thought, her mind racing. What do they want from us? Suddenly, a series of blinding flashes lit up the darkness outside. The ship jolted violently, throwing Maria off balance. She stumbled, but quickly regained her footing. The crew around her scrambled, trying to assess the damage. It was clear the shields were failing. The Hope's beacon wasn't built to withstand this kind of assault. They were on borrowed time. "We've lost shield power," a technician shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Hull integrity is compromised. Another direct hit, and we'll breach. Maria's eyes widened. This was worse than she had feared. The ship was vulnerable, exposed. There was no way to fight back. The attackers were far superior, their ships more advanced than anything humanity had. It wasn't a fair fight. In fact, it wasn't a fight at all. The Hope's beacon had no weapons to defend itself. The crew couldn't retaliate. They could only hope to survive. The captain's voice came through the intercom again, cutting through the rising panic. All crew, prepare for emergency protocols. I've sent out distress signals, but it's going to take hours for any reinforcements to get here. We're on our own. Hold tight, people. This is going to get rough. Maria felt a cold chill sweep through her. Hours. They had hours before anyone could help. The attackers could rip them apart in seconds. What could they want? She thought again. They weren't taking any prisoners. There was no communication, no demand for surrender. The aliens were simply firing on the ship as if it were nothing more than a target to practice on. As the ship shuddered under another blast, the lights flickered. Maria's eyes darted to the monitor again. The alien ships were closing in. One of them, larger than the others, seemed to be in command. It had a sleek, dark body, with glowing red lines running along its surface. The insignia on its side was unfamiliar, but its message was clear. We are here to conquer. Maria's mind raced. If they didn't want prisoners, if they were just trying to destroy the ship, why? What could they want from us? She had no answers, but one thing was painfully clear. The Hope's beacon wasn't going to make it out of this unless something changed. Then she felt it, the change. There was a shift in the air, a small but significant difference in the way the crew moved. They weren't just preparing for evacuation anymore. They were preparing for something else. Maria didn't know what that something was yet, but she could feel it. Whatever happened next, they were going to fight. It wasn't much. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have a fleet, but they had something else. Determination. She stood taller, her pulse steadying as she turned to the crew. We're not going down without a fight, she said, her voice firm and resolute. Prepare everything you can. We're going to show them what humanity is capable of. The crew looked at her, their faces a mixture of fear and resolve. Maria wasn't a fighter, but she knew how to lead. And in this moment, that was all that mattered. The Hope's beacon was about to find out exactly how far human determination could take them. The Hope's beacon trembled as another blast rocked its hull. The ship was now a fragile vessel, surrounded by an alien fleet that showed no signs of relenting. Captain Flynn's voice over the intercom was steady, but the worry in his tone was impossible to ignore. We've lost secondary systems. Shields are down to 30%. If we don't come up with something, we're finished. Maria Collins, the ship's medical officer, felt the weight of the captain's words settle heavily in her chest. She was used to saving lives, to managing medical emergencies. But this was different. She wasn't trained for combat. She wasn't a soldier. But somehow, this wasn't the time to hesitate. The crew was looking to her, their faces drawn with fear, but there was no time to address that now. The hospital ship, once a sanctuary for healing, was a target, a helpless target. We need a plan, Maria muttered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. Her mind raced, but she struggled to think through the chaos. As the ship shook again, Maria's gaze turned toward the holographic map that displayed the alien fleet, their ships closing in around them like vultures circling their prey. There had to be a way to fight back. But the ship wasn't equipped for combat. The Hope's beacon was built for saving lives, not for surviving attacks. She glanced back at the medical officers working feverishly, making sure the emergency medical stations were prepared for an influx of injured crew members. But the question still lingered. What could they do? Maria. Flynn's voice called from across the room, pulling her out of her thoughts. We need you to think of something. You're our best chance. Maria swallowed, her mind still racing. She could see the problem clearly now. The ship was exposed. There was no way they could outrun the alien ships. No way they could fight with traditional weapons. They were sitting ducks. But her training, her years of medical research and problem-solving, had always taught her to think outside the box. Maybe there was something on board the ship that could turn the tide, something they weren't using in the right way. She turned quickly, addressing the control room. "Do we have access to all of the ship's systems?" she asked, her voice suddenly firm. "Everything is online, but..." Flynn hesitated. "The main systems are compromised. We've lost half the power." "Why?" Maria's eyes flickered to the medical equipment arrays. That's when the idea hit her. The Hope's beacon wasn't a warship, but it did have advanced technology designed to help those who were seriously injured. It had medical systems capable of operating on a level far beyond what most ships in the galaxy could manage. But what if they could use those systems in a completely different way? What if we used the ship's medical tech? Maria said, her eyes lighting up with a new sense of purpose. The healing lasers, the life support systems, even the bioscans. We could reprogram them to interfere with their systems. If we can't directly fight them, we could shut them down. The room fell silent for a moment. It was a radical idea, but given the situation, it was the only one that seemed remotely possible. "You're thinking of using the ship's medical systems as a weapon?" Flynn asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," Maria responded without hesitation. "We'll disrupt their technology. Not with force, but by using their own systems against them." She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but it was the only viable option. If they had any hope of surviving, they needed to do something no one would expect. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she couldn't let that stop her. They had nothing left to lose. Maria turned to the control officer. "Redirect all available power to the medical systems. Focus on the laser grids, the life support generators, and any bioscanning equipment that could interfere with the alien ships." The officer hesitated, clearly worried about the consequences of such a move. But Maria met his gaze with steady confidence. "Do it. We're going to turn their technology against them." The crew moved quickly, but time was running out. As the alien ships closed in, the Hope's beacon systems began to rewire. The crew reprogrammed the laser arrays, tuning them not to heal, but to disrupt the electromagnetic fields around the alien fleet's ships. The idea was simple: overload their systems, fry their circuits, and make their weapons useless. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best they had. Outside, the alien ships were closing in fast. Their weapons were primed, and the fleet's commander had probably already made plans to board the ship and take it, or destroy it. Maria thought, her mind racing. But she wouldn't let that happen. She couldn't. Suddenly, the first of the laser systems activated. A concentrated beam of energy shot out from the Hope's beacon, its target the closest alien ship. The light was blinding, and for a moment, Maria held her breath. The beam connected, and an explosion of sparks erupted from the alien ship. The ship shuddered as its hull began to flicker and distort. The laser was working. It wasn't much, but it was enough to disable one of the alien ship's defensive shields. The crew erupted in a mix of cheers and disbelief. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. Maria quickly turned her attention back to the medical systems. "More power to the bioscanners," she shouted. "Focus on their engines. We need to fry their power systems." The medical staff worked quickly, monitoring the reprogrammed systems as they targeted the remaining alien ships. The bioscanners, originally used to monitor the health of patients, now focused on the alien ship's internal systems, looking for weak points to target. The Hope's beacon wasn't equipped for combat, but its technology meant to heal, was now fighting back. It was a clever, if unorthodox, strategy. Maria could only hope it would be enough. Then, just as she thought they might have a chance, another blast struck the ship. This one was stronger, and the ship groaned under the strain. Sparks flew from the main control panel, and a panel in the ceiling exploded in a flash of bright blue light. It was clear now. The aliens weren't going to back off easily. But the crew didn't falter. They continued working, adjusting systems, redirecting power, and fine-tuning the medical equipment. The ship was shaking, the sound of explosions echoing through the halls. But Maria remained focused. Every moment counted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a loud thud reverberated through the ship. The alien fleet's shields flickered, then shut down completely. Maria's heart skipped a beat. The alien ships, once powerful and threatening, now floated helplessly in space. They had been blinded, their systems overloaded by the Hope's beacon's medical tech. They weren't destroyed, but they were effectively neutralized. It wasn't over yet. There were still the alien commanders, still the threat of another wave of attacks. But for the first time in hours, Maria allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The humans had struck back, and they had done it with the very technology meant to save lives. "We've bought some time," Maria said, turning to the crew. "But this is far from over. We need to get ready for whatever comes next." The crew nodded, knowing they had done something no one had expected. They hadn't won the battle yet, but they had proven that humans could fight back, not with brute force, but with ingenuity, creativity, and a relentless will to survive. The Hope's beacon wasn't just a hospital ship anymore. It was a symbol of humanity's refusal to give up, no matter the odds. The alien ships, now crippled by the ingenuity of the Hope's beacon's medical systems, drifted ominously in the cold expanse of space. The crew had bought themselves some time, but they knew that time was a precious commodity. The alien fleet wasn't finished yet. Maria could feel the weight of their situation settle heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't a victory. It was just a brief respite. But it was all they had. "Captain, we've managed to disable most of their fleet's weapons," Maria said, her voice steady, but tinged with exhaustion. She glanced over at the map showing the status of the alien ships. Most were neutralized, but one, its hull far darker and more menacing than the others, still remained fully operational. It was the command ship, the one that had initiated the attack, the one that had the power to finish them off in an instant. "Good work, Maria," Captain Flynn replied, his voice grim. "But that command ship's still a problem. It hasn't budged an inch. We need to figure out a way to finish the job before they get any ideas about regrouping." Maria nodded. There was no easy solution. The Hope's beacon was built to heal, not to destroy. Their ability to fight back had been a fluke, a clever use of their medical tech in an emergency, but it wasn't a permanent solution. As she stared at the command ship on the display, a thought flickered through her mind. They hadn't just used the ship's medical technology to disable the enemy's shields and weapons. There was one more system, one that could turn the tide completely. She turned quickly toward the crew. "What if we used the beacon's internal bioscanner network to create a feedback loop? We've already disrupted their tech once. If we can overload their systems again, we might be able to force a full shutdown." Flynn raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting that we use our medical bioscanners to hack into their system, to disrupt their internal networks again?" "It's the only option," Maria said, her voice filled with urgency. "We've already tapped into their weak points. Their ships rely on complex networked systems. If we can intercept and amplify our bioscanners' output, we can essentially overload the core systems of their command ship." Flynn looked skeptical, but Maria could see his mind working, weighing the risks against the potential payoff. He had always trusted her decisions when it came to saving lives. But this wasn't a medical emergency. It was war. "Do we have the power to pull this off?" he asked. Maria glanced at the power readings. The Hope's beacon wasn't built for heavy combat, but it did have surplus energy reserves meant for the most intensive surgeries and medical procedures. If they reallocated everything to the bioscanners, it might just be enough to complete the task. "We'll need to redirect all available energy to the bioscanners, and we'll have to do it in short bursts. Any prolonged activation could cause a system-wide failure, she warned. But it's a risk we'll have to take. The crew began reconfiguring the ship's energy grid, rerouting power to the bioscanner network. The tension was palpable. As the technicians worked, Maria felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control. They had been thrown into the deep end, forced to adapt or die. But humans were nothing if not adaptable. And she would be damned if she let them fall here. Not like this. The alien command ship's dark hull glowed ominously in space. Maria watched it closely. They were running out of time. If the command ship fired on them again, the Hope's beacon wouldn't survive. It was as simple as that. The alien fleet might be crippled, but the flagship was still a threat. Power rerouted, one of the technicians called out. We're ready to fire. Maria nodded. Redirect the beam to the command ship's communications relay. If we can take that down, we'll cut off their ability to coordinate. It'll disrupt their entire fleet's command structure. Understood, the technician replied. The ship's bioscanners, once used to analyze patient vitals and scan for diseases, now hummed with a different purpose. They were repurposed, transformed into tools of disruption. The crew had no weapons, no conventional means of defense, but they had brains and they had technology. And right now, that was their best weapon. Charging. Now, the technician announced. The entire control room seemed to hold its breath. Maria stared at the monitor. The alien flagship was just within range. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as the ship's comms relayed strange, alien signals, too complex for the crew to fully understand. They were probably receiving orders to destroy the Hope's beacon. Ready to fire in 3. The technician's voice cut through the silence. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. If they failed, they would die. If they succeeded, it was hard to say what would happen. But one thing was certain. This was humanity's fight, and they wouldn't back down. 2. 1. The ship's bioscanners fired a concentrated burst of energy, a targeted disruption pulse aimed directly at the communications relay of the alien command ship. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the control room was suffocating. But then, the alien command ship's massive hull flickered, its lights dimming before suddenly cutting out entirely. The comms display showed multiple system failures. The flagship, once a symbol of their power, was suddenly powerless. Its connection to the rest of the fleet was severed. It couldn't communicate, couldn't direct the rest of its forces. For all intents and purposes, it was as good as dead. The crew erupted in cheers, but Maria's eyes remained fixed on the display. The alien ships began to drift aimlessly in space, completely disoriented without their leader. They were no longer a cohesive force. They were individual ships, left to wander without coordination. We did it, Flynn breathed, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Maria allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she felt as if they had a chance. The Hope's beacon had struck back, not with weapons or military might, but with something far more human, ingenuity. They had used their knowledge and creativity to turn the tide, and in doing so, they had saved themselves, at least for now. But Maria knew the war wasn't won. The alien fleet would regroup, and they would be back. The Hope's beacon couldn't afford another attack. They needed to act quickly, find a way to escape or get reinforcements before it was too late. Prepare for a retreat, Maria ordered, turning to the crew. We need to get out of here while we still can. With the alien fleet in disarray, the Hope's beacon began its slow retreat, hoping to escape the worst of the battle. But one thing was certain. The crew had survived. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could outsmart its enemies. They had fought not just for survival, but for the hope that one day, peace could be achieved in this war-torn galaxy. And for now, That was enough. The Hope's beacon drifted through space, its engines pushing the ship away from the now disoriented alien fleet. The crew was exhausted, their bodies weary from the relentless battle that had just unfolded. But there was no time for rest. They had bought themselves a moment, a brief respite, but they knew it wouldn't last. The alien command ship had been neutralized, but the enemy was still out there, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't regroup and strike again. Maria stood at the ship's command center, looking over the crew's work. They had managed to create something truly extraordinary, something no one had expected. The ship, once a symbol of peace and healing, had become a tool of defense. But the cost of that ingenuity was clear. The crew had pushed their technology beyond its intended use. They had taken risks that could have easily turned the Hope's beacon into a casualty of the battle. But they had survived. For now. "Maria, you need to see this," one of the crew members called out from the communications console. His face was tense, his fingers flying over the keys as he worked to decode a transmission. She approached quickly, her heart already beginning to race. "What is it?" "It's a message," he said, his voice tight. "It's coming from the alien fleet." Maria's eyes narrowed. They had been hoping for a quick getaway, a chance to escape while the enemy was disoriented. But now, it seemed that the alien forces had regrouped far faster than they had anticipated. The message flickered on the screen, a distorted alien transmission. It was almost impossible to decipher, the language completely foreign, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was a warning. Maria turned to Flynn, who had joined her at the console. "What does it say?" The technician worked feverishly to break down the code, his brow furrowing. After what seemed like an eternity, he looked up, his expression grave. "It's a threat. They're sending reinforcements. More ships are coming. They want us destroyed." Flynn cursed under his breath. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," the technician replied. "We estimate about 12 hours before their reinforcements arrive. They'll be here faster than we can outrun them." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. 12 hours, that was no time at all. They had barely survived the first wave of the attack, and now a second, larger wave was coming. They couldn't afford to face them head-on. The Hope's beacon wasn't a warship. It couldn't stand up to a full-on assault from an alien fleet. "Do we have any chance of making it to the nearest human base?" Maria asked, her voice calm despite the rising panic inside her. Flynn didn't answer right away. He glanced at the map, then at the ship's power levels. They had only just managed to limp away from the alien fleet. The Hope's beacon had no real weapons to fight back, and while it had been built to survive in hostile environments, it wasn't designed for combat. It was a hospital ship, not a war machine. "We might make it," he said finally, "but it'll be a tight race. We'd have to push the engines past their limit, risk damaging the ship even more. The question is, do we think we can make it that far without getting caught?" Maria didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. We have to try." Flynn nodded grimly. "All right. We'll reroute all available power to the engines. The next 12 hours are going to be a gamble, but we don't have another option. Everyone, brace yourselves. It's going to be a bumpy ride." The crew scrambled to execute their plan. Every system on the Hope's beacon was running at full capacity, and even then, it wasn't enough. The ship's hull groaned in protest as the engines roared to life, pushing the hospital ship to its limits. But Maria didn't dwell on the technical details. She had a plan, and right now, that was all that mattered. If they could reach the human base, they would be safe, but they had to make it there first. The alien fleet wasn't far behind, and they weren't going to give up easily. As the ship hurtled through space, Maria couldn't help but look out into the stars. This was her fight now. The Hope's beacon wasn't just a hospital anymore. It was their lifeline. The crew was fighting for survival, for a future where they wouldn't just be victims, but survivors. Maria had seen the worst of what the galaxy had to offer, But she had also seen humanity's resilience. If they could survive this, they could survive anything. Time seemed to stretch and warp as the hours passed. The Hope's beacon raced through the dark void of space, its path illuminated only by the distant glow of distant stars. The crew worked tirelessly, constantly monitoring their systems, checking for damage, and making sure their course remained steady. The alien fleet was still out there, but for now, it was a distant threat. Then, with only a few hours left before the alien reinforcements were expected to arrive, something unexpected happened. "Captain, we're receiving a signal," the communications officer said, his voice filled with surprise. It's coming from the human base." Maria's heart skipped a beat. They had made it. They were going to be safe. "Patch it through," Flynn ordered, his voice a mixture of hope and caution. The comm screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. It was Admiral Hayes, the commander of the human base they had been hoping to reach. "Captain Flynn, Maria," the Admiral said, her face grim but relieved. "We've been monitoring your situation. We know about the alien fleet and the danger you're in. You've done well to survive this long, but we're not going to let you face them alone. Reinforcements are already on their way. Help is coming." Maria exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered with the knowledge that this fight wasn't over. They had survived the first wave, but the war was far from won. "Thank you, Admiral," Flynn said, his voice full of gratitude. "We'll be ready for them." "How long until your reinforcements arrive?" "Approximately 6 hours," Admiral Hayes replied. "We're pushing everything we have to get to you. Just hold on a little longer. We'll make sure you're safe." Maria turned to Flynn, her expression resolute. "We can make it. We have 6 hours. We just need to hold on." Flynn nodded. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got a fighting chance." As the Hope's beacon continued its race toward safety, Maria couldn't help but think of the journey they had already made. They had faced impossible odds, used ingenuity and resourcefulness to turn the tide, and now they had reinforcements on the way. This was their fight, and humanity was proving that it would not go down without a fight. The battle for survival was just beginning, and the Hope's beacon was ready to face whatever came next. The Hope's beacon continued its journey through the cold expanse of space, its hull straining against the sheer force of the makeshift propulsion system that had been pushed to its limits. Maria stood at the bridge, staring at the star-streaked view, knowing that every passing second brought them closer to the reinforcements that had been promised. 6 hours. It was a small window of time, and the alien fleet wasn't going to wait around. They knew the Hope's beacon was a wounded prey, and their reinforcements would be the perfect target. "Captain, we've got an incoming transmission," the communications officer said, his voice tight. "It's from the alien fleet." Maria's stomach dropped. Even after the damage they'd inflicted on the enemy flagship, the aliens had proven themselves relentless. Whatever this transmission was, it couldn't be good. "Patch it through," Flynn said, his voice cool, though his eyes betrayed his concern. Maria watched the screen flicker to life, revealing an alien face, its features barely comprehensible to the human eye. But the emotion was unmistakable. The alien's eyes, wide, dark, and full of hatred, stared out at them. "You think you can outrun us?" The alien's voice came through in broken, harsh tones, the words coming out like a challenge. "You have delayed nothing. Our reinforcements will come. You will not survive this." The transmission ended abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening. "They know we're running for reinforcements," Flynn muttered, his jaw tightening. "They're going to come at us harder now." Maria's mind raced. The alien fleet had already been weakened, but they weren't finished. Their reinforcements would come in full force, and with the Hope's beacon vulnerable, there was no guarantee they'd make it in time. They had to find a way to hold off the aliens, even if only for a few more hours. "We don't have a choice," Maria said, turning to Flynn. "We have to keep running. They can't catch us if we keep the pressure on the engines. But we need to keep them distracted. Make sure they don't close the gap." Flynn nodded, clearly weighing the situation in his mind. "We've been running on fumes for hours. Pushing the engines any harder might cause a critical failure." Maria looked around at the crew, all of them working in unison, their faces tired but determined. They couldn't stop now. Every moment counted. "Then we need to make sure they don't catch up. Can we try to simulate a sensor anomaly? Maybe we can trick them into thinking we split our fleet or made an unexpected course change." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. Maria wasn't sure it would work, but if it could buy them even a few more minutes, it might be worth it. "We can fake a signal," the ship's engineer said. "If we reroute some of our remaining power to the external sensors and make it look like we're accelerating in the opposite direction." Maria nodded, cutting him off. "Do it. Make it look like we're running for the other side of the system. They'll think we're scattering, and it might slow them down long enough for the reinforcements to arrive." The engineer quickly got to work, inputting commands and reprogramming the ship's sensors. The seconds felt like hours as the crew held their breath, hoping that their plan would be enough. "Signal's up and running," the technician reported. "We're broadcasting false trajectory data. The alien fleet should see it as an escape route." Maria nodded. "Now we wait." It was a strange feeling, the helplessness of waiting, while the fate of everyone aboard hung in the balance. But Maria had always believed in human adaptability, in the ability to think outside the box, to create solutions from nothing. They had done it before. They could do it again. Hours passed, but the alien fleet did not change its course. It seemed that their plan had worked. For the moment, they were safe. Maria allowed herself to exhale, but she knew better than to relax. The enemy would not be fooled for long. Then came the moment that Maria had been dreading. The alien fleet had caught up. "Captain, the aliens are on an intercept course," the communications officer called out, panic creeping into his voice. "They've seen through the ruse. They're closing in fast." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had known it wouldn't last. She quickly turned to Flynn, who was already making preparations. "Activate evasive maneuvers," Flynn ordered. "We don't have the firepower to fight them off, but we can still outrun them." Maria's pulse quickened. The ship was still a good distance from the human base, but at this rate, the aliens would catch up long before reinforcements arrived. They couldn't afford to keep running forever. "Get those engines running at maximum output," Maria snapped, her voice hard with resolve. "We need every ounce of speed we can get. Divert all power to the engines and shields. We'll push the limits." The crew worked quickly, fingers flying over controls as they fed everything into the Hope's beacon's propulsion systems. The ship groaned, protesting the pressure, but it held together. Maria watched the status display as the alien fleet loomed closer. They couldn't keep up the chase for much longer. And then, just as the alien ships began their final approach, the sensors picked up a faint signal, a signal that grew stronger with each passing second. Maria's breath caught in her throat. "They're here," she whispered. The reinforcements had arrived. Through the ship's viewport, Maria could see the faint outline of human ships emerging from the far side of the system. Their engines glowed a bright blue as they closed in, taking up a defensive formation around the Hope's beacon. The sight brought an overwhelming sense of relief. "Admiral Hayes' fleet," Flynn said, his voice filled with hope. But the alien fleet wasn't going to give up so easily. They immediately began charging their weapons, preparing to make a final push for the Hope's beacon. The battle that followed was chaos. Human and alien ships collided in a flurry of laser fire and explosions. The Hope's beacon, now surrounded by its own fleet, was shielded from the worst of the fighting. But the crew could still feel the tremors as the battle raged around them. Maria stood by the control panel, eyes darting between the displays. "We've got to hold on just a little longer," Flynn said, his voice tight. Minutes passed, but to Maria, it felt like hours. Then, the moment came. The alien fleet, now battered and broken by the human reinforcements, began to retreat. The remaining alien ships had no choice but to fall back, their tactics disrupted, their morale shattered. It was over. For now. The Hope's beacon had survived. They had faced impossible odds, used everything they had, and come out the other side victorious. They had done it not with sheer firepower, but with ingenuity, teamwork, and an unbreakable resolve. Maria stood at the viewport, watching as the alien ships disappeared into the distance. Defeated, she felt a deep, steadying breath escape her. They had won, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The war wasn't over, but humanity had just proven that they could survive. They could fight back. And as long as the Hope's beacon was out there, as long as there were humans willing to stand and fight, hope was never truly lost.